Juganawt.
Hello and welcome to my top 20 Amiga scrolling beat-em-ups list, also known as the Brawler genre. My rules for this list are very simple. Number 1, no one-on-one fighters, they have to be scrolling beat-em-ups, basically you versus many enemies. And bear in mind that this is my list, it's not by committee, it's nobody else's list. These are my personal preferences. Yours may vary, so bear that in mind as we go to Number 20, Sword of Sodan. Sword of Sodan is a game that's had its name tainted a little bit by the Sega Mega Drive port, but back in the day when this game first came out on the Amiga, it was mind-blowing. We've never seen graphics of this size and this detail before. It was mesmerising, it was mind-blowing, it was violent, and the scrolling beat-em-up, while it was cheap with a couple of traps here and there that killed you instantly, was a lot of fun back in the day. Definitely a product of its era. Number 19, Dynasty Wars. And while a lot of people think this game isn't a good conversion, I disagree. I had a lot of fun with this back in the day. When I was a kid, I got this for Easter one year, and it single-handedly started my love affair with the Romance of the Three Kingdoms Chinese War era. This game, while it's not an amazing arcade conversion, is a fun game to play, and if you take it for that and that alone, it's worth looking at. Especially in 2-player, you can have a good time playing. Number 18, Alien Storm, and while it may not be the first name of a game that springs to mind when you think of scrolling beat-em-ups, Alien Storm is still fun. It's not going to be at the top of anyone's list, it's not the creme de la creme of scrolling beat-em-ups, but it has its own charm, and it has these interesting first-person shooter sections, a fair variety of interesting player characters, and more interesting enemies to beat the living crap out of. Definitely more fun in multiplayer mode, but still a good laugh in single player. Number 17, will rise from your grave. It's Altered Beast. Now, Altered Beast, we all know it's not the greatest arcade game, and it's not the best conversion of an arcade game either. But, however, this is one of those games that I owned as a kid, and as a kid I had limited income, I had my pocket money, so therefore I had a limited library of games to play. This one was great in multiplayer that I could play with my friends. It gave you the arcade feel, even though it wasn't arcade perfect. It boiled the essence of the arcade game down, even if it had a few bits missing. Number 16, Vigilante. In this era of home computer arcade ports, you weren't expecting to get visually accurate or sound accurate games from their arcade cousins. As long as the feel was right, or the feel was similar to what you experienced in the arcade, that was considered a good conversion. Vigilante doesn't look the part, it doesn't really sound the part, but for the most part, it plays like the arcade game. And that arcade game has a very special place in my heart. Number 15, Ninja Warriors. This was an arcade smash, and it was really done well for the computers. This wasn't a game that didn't feel like an arcade game. It isn't a game that didn't look like the arcade game. This is a very good rendition all around. It even attempts to emulate the arcade's widescreen ratio for this game. The arcade game was run on 3 screens side by side, and the Amiga replicates this by using overscan and its resolution to stretch the screen out wide. It really looks the part. It's a great game to play. The only downside is the soundtrack is missing. Number 14, Motorhead, based on the band of the same name with the late, great Lemmy. Motorhead is a hidden gem. A lot of people don't know that the game exists. It wasn't that well advertised, and when you play it, it certainly is unique. Let's put it that way. You won't play another beat-em-up that quite feels like Motorhead. It's got a very unique art style, very unique attacks, and it definitely oozes Motorhead style. The power-ups are Lemmy's favourite drink. The character looks like Lemmy, and the game follows Lemmy's mantra of not taking life seriously. Number 13, Renegade, a piss-poor port of an arcade classic. In fact, the 8-bit ZX Spectrum, Amstrad CPC, and Sega Master System versions all do a better job of this game than the Amiga port does. But that being said, what is encapsulated on this floppy disk is fun. and that's all that matters. Number 12, Beastlord, and this is an extremely interesting take on the side-scrolling beat-em-up. In fact, you could argue that it's not really a beat-em-up, it's more like an RPG. You have people that you have to talk to, you've got areas that you have to explore, it's non-linear, it's very interesting indeed, and it's a good fun game. You get to punch drunkards, animals, innocent bystanders, it's all good fun. The visuals are very striking in the game. There's a great ambient sound bed throughout the game. Beastlord is an overlooked gem by an overlooked company. And speaking of overlooked, number 11 is Double Dragon 3 The Rosetta Stone. It's overlooked because the original arcade version was a bit crap, due to its slow, janky, unimpressive frame rate. However, the Amiga version is silky smooth and therefore is better than the arcade original. Also, this is the only game in the Double Dragon series that officially links to Renegade and the Kunio-Kun series by introducing Kunio as a playable character in Double Dragon. Number 10, Shadow Dancer, and this is a follow-up to Shinobi. This is set in the same universe as Shinobi, just a bit in the future, and you can definitely see the lineage as you play it. The level layouts, the hostages have been replaced by bombs, but it's still a very simplistic left to right hack and slash. However, now you have a dog that you can instruct to attack enemies or defend you, and that adds a whole new dynamic to the gameplay, which is fantastic, by the way. I remember spending many hours playing this game as a child, and I still play it to this day. It is one of my all-time favourite games. Shadow Dancer cannot be heartily recommended enough. Shadow Dancer should be held in as high regard as Shinobi 1, 2 and 3 in the arcades and the Sega Mega Drive. But let's forget about the Amiga port of Shinobi. It was shit. Number 9, and are you a bad enough dude to rescue the president? Well, if you are, you should be playing Bad Dudes vs Dragon Ninja, which is an excellent arcade conversion. It's a rock solid but enjoyable fighting game. This overloads you with enemies on both sides of the screen. It seems like insurmountable odds at every given opportunity. However, you're such a bad dude that you can take him out with a single punch or a single kick, and it feels really satisfying to do that. Once you get used to the fact that they shoehorn the controls in to fit on a single button joystick, it does take a little bit getting used to. This is a really good conversion, and it's so much fun to play, whether you're playing it by yourself or playing with friends. Bad Dudes vs Dragon Ninja has to be in my top 10 brawlers of all time, let alone for just the Amiga. It's a fun title with a fun title. It's definitely a product of its era. Number 8, Barbarian 2, also known as Acts of Rage. Barbarian 1 was featured in my one-on-one fighting games list for the Amiga. Barbarian 2 decides to seg away from the one-on-one fighting space and turn itself into a multi-directional brawler. Now, by multi-directional, that means that the map in the game has 4 directions that you can follow. You can go north, south, east and west, and that's represented by going left and right on the screen and entering any caverns, caves or pathways that you see represented on the game itself. It's brutally difficult. You will suffer lots of cheap deaths, but those deaths are visually entertaining, and the game is a lot of fun. You will spend hours being lost and dying horrifically over and over again until you get a grasp of the level layouts. And then once you do get a grasp of those level layouts, you will enjoy exploring them time and time again, and you'll eventually be able to complete the game. Number 7, Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles, The Coin Up. Now, I say Hero Turtles because in the late 80s and early 90s in the UK, anything with the word ninjas in was banned for some really stupid reason about saving school kids' lives or what have you. Anyway, I digress. Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles is I'll be honest, a below average conversion of the arcade original. However, a conversion of the arcade original it was, and as a 10-year-old boy, getting the ability to play an arcade game that I've pumped at least 20 quid in 10p pieces of my hard-earned pocket money on this game. Having the ability to play this game at home whenever I wanted, with or without friends, was simply magical, and I adore this piss-poor conversion. Number 6, Shadow Warriors, also known as Ninja Gaiden. As mentioned previously in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, saying ninja was a no-no in the UK, so they changed the name of this arcade game of Ninja Gaiden to Shadow Warriors, but everything else from the arcade game remains intact. The graphics still look pretty solid, all of the interaction with the scenery is there, present and correct. It plays just like the arcade conversion, and it takes careful consideration of the Amiga's one-button control layout. It's such a shame that Shadow Warriors, or Ninja Gaiden as it was known, got overshadowed by its 8-bit NES counterpart. The 8-bit NES Ninja Gaiden is what everybody instantly thinks of when they think of the Ninja Gaiden series, or possibly the Xbox reboot in 3D, but it's a shame because this arcade game should be experienced by more people. Anybody who's into a retro kick, who likes fighting games, should absolutely check out Shadow Warriors, whether that is in the arcade or on the Commodore Amiga. You can't go wrong. Number 5, and we're back in shitty arcade conversion territory again with Double Dragon. Double Dragon, yes, the arcade classic, which had a few problems of its own. It had slowdown issues, much like Double Dragon 3 that we mentioned earlier did. However, this Amiga version doesn't have that slowdown issue, but it does have a few issues of its own, namely awful graphics, no music, and a bit of a wonky control scheme. If you set those aside, though, and you boil it down to its arcade essence, it's still a freaking great beat-em-up, despite its problems, despite the fact that it looks like 6-year-olds have drawn it in Microsoft Paint, despite the fact that the sound effects are hilariously bad. Double Dragon is a classic for a reason, and that is because the gameplay, and that's the most important thing out of all of these games, the gameplay is absolutely timeless. Number 4, Dynamite Ducks. I love this game. This game is just amazing. Dynamite Ducks, let me tell you a quick story, really quick. When I was a kid, I must have been about 12 at the time, we went to Blackpool Pleasure Beach in the UK for our family holiday. Now, this was special because we couldn't afford to go on holidays often. And in Blackpool, they had an arcade, and in this arcade, I discovered this game called Dynamite Ducks, which I'd never seen before. Where I lived, there weren't very many games in our modest arcade, and the games were, you know, the popular ones. Dynamite Ducks was this new, unique, cartoony, really interesting arcade game that grabbed my attention, and I played it for hours. I spent loads of my spending money just playing through this wonderful game with this beautiful graphic style, its warm, inviting music, and it's just joyous energy. And then on the way home at the end of the week, we stopped into a computer store because I wanted to buy a game with my leftover spending money, and lo and behold, it was there. This amazing arcade game that I didn't even know existed up until that very week was there in the store, available for purchase for the Amiga that I owned at home. So of course I grabbed that game off the shelf, I put my money down, I think it was £24.99, and I was so excited to end my holiday so that I could go back home and play it again. Number 3, Double Dragon 2, The Revenge. Your girlfriend has been murdered, so you go on a rampage and kick the living crap out of that big bad gang whose name I've forgotten all about. But it doesn't really matter, because all that matters is that you and a friend will beat the living daylights out of endless enemies. Some will look like Arnold Schwarzenegger in The Terminator, some will look like they've just stepped off the set of the latest Mad Max movie. It doesn't matter, it just brings you a diverse range of people that you can kill in interesting ways, with a selection of interesting weapons and fighting moves. A good, wholesome time to be had by all. Great game, great conversion too, really well realised, really well thought out for a single button layout of the Amiga. It sounds good, it looks good, it plays gloriously. Number 2, Final Fight, and I promise you this is the final crappy arcade conversion on our list. Final Fight at the time seemed like a very accurate representation of what the arcade classic was all about. However, in hindsight, and of course with technological advances, you really do see how much of the arcade game was missing from the Amiga port, but that doesn't mean that the Amiga port is a bad game. While it may have different enemy positioning to the arcade game, and it may not have level transitions like the arcade game, it may not have music like the arcade game, and it may not have a smooth frame rate like the arcade game, it does have its core gameplay. Final Fight's core mechanics were faithfully translated. In fact, in many ways, the Amiga version's harder than the arcade version because the AI will quite often box you into a corner and beat the living daylights out of you. You really have to practice this game to see the ending. Number 1 of my all-time favourite Amiga beat-em-ups is Golden Axe, and how could it not be? What a wonderful conversion of an arcade classic. Golden Axe on the Amiga is respectful of its source material, it's respectful of the hardware it's running on, and it's respectful of the control method that most people will be using to play the game, which is a one-button joystick. Golden Axe on the Amiga is a tour de force and a textbook example of how to do an arcade to computer port. I love Golden Axe in the arcade. It's one of my favourite games ever. In fact, it's one of the first games I ever learned how to speedrun, and that was purely because I had the arcade version of the game at home on my Amiga, for all intents and purposes. Almost everything that was in the arcade original was translated faithfully onto the home computer, and it was so much fun. Me and my friends played this quite often, and its fantasy setting was quite unique back in the day. You didn't see many beat-em-ups that had a fantasy setting. It was always street, gritty kind of visuals, and Golden Axe kind of embraced this fantasy environment with right-arm dragons, these strange creatures, and even more strange enemies. And it is just the whole package. And speaking of packages, if you want to see a collection of all of my other videos, please hit subscribe, and if you want to be notified of when my next video goes live, touch my bell end. It will be right next to the subscribe button. That will notify you of when my next video goes live. In the meantime, check me out on social media. Bye.